Port Charles just got hit with one of those chaos-heavy, nerve-shredding family disasters that starts in one room and then somehow blows through half the town before anybody can catch their breath. And honestly, it all happened so fast that even people standing right there probably didn't fully get what they were seeing until it was already too late. Jason was, by all appearances, at the very end of packing, the last sweep, the last bag, the kind of moment where a person is mentally already gone even if their body is still in the room. And then everything snapped. No warning that mattered. No soft lead-in. Danny suddenly collapsed right there onto the floor, foaming at the mouth, body jerking in violent seizures, turning what should have been a tense but manageable goodbye into an all-out nightmare. And Jason, because of course Jason is Jason, didn't stop to think in neat little steps. Didn't freeze long. Didn't wait around for somebody else to tell him what to do. He panicked, sure, but it was the kind of panic that moves. He grabbed his son, scooped him up, and rushed straight to General Hospital like a man trying to outrun death itself. Which in a way he was. So now, what looked like one family emergency became a full medical crisis. Fast. Loud. Messy. The kind of thing that sends doctors and nurses into that very specific mode where everybody starts talking over everybody else. Machines start screaming and every second suddenly feels expensive. And right in the middle of that storm was Britt Westbourne, who got pulled into the life or death case, whether she was ready or not. And that's where this whole thing stops being just tragic and starts getting seriously twisted. Because Danny was not simply struck by some random medical event. He wasn't just unlucky. He wasn't the victim of some mystery illness that came out of nowhere at the worst possible time. No, the horrifying truth, the really ugly part of this whole story, is that Danny had secretly injected himself with a drug designed to slow his heart rate and trigger fake symptoms. Fake, at least at first, enough to make it look real, enough to terrify Jason, enough to stop him from leaving Port Charles. And yeah, that part is hard to even type out without just stopping for a second. Because what kind of desperation does it take for a kid to do that? That's the question hanging over this whole disaster. Bigger than the immediate medical emergency in some ways. Bigger than the screaming monitors and the frantic rush through hospital doors. Danny didn't just get sick. He made himself sick. On purpose. He set this whole terrifying chain reaction into motion because he was that afraid of Jason leaving, that determined to keep him close, that trapped inside whatever emotional storm he's been carrying, that this felt like the answer. And it worked. For a moment anyway. Brutally, brilliantly, horribly, it worked. Jason stayed. But the plan, if you can even call it a plan and not just sheer panic and action, came with a price Danny clearly didn't fully understand. Because the drug didn't just produce a convincing performance. It created a real danger. A deadly one. The fake crisis crossed the line into an actual medical collapse, and unless the antidote could be given in time, Danny was no longer acting sick. He was in genuine danger of heart failure. So that's the sick irony of it all. The trick succeeded, and then it almost killed him. And that's why this whole thing feels less like a simple plot twist and more like one long scream. At General Hospital, the mood reportedly shifted almost by the second. First, confusion. Then urgency. Then fear. Then that special kind of dread that creeps in when the people in the room realize the usual assumptions may not apply. Britt Westbourne, now deeply involved in Danny's treatment, found herself facing not only a child in acute distress, but also a hidden truth that changed the medical picture completely. Because once you know a patient has taken something deliberately, every symptom means something else. Every second gets heavier, and every wrong guess gets more dangerous. And Britt, whatever people think of her, has never exactly been a stranger to high-pressure medical crises. But this one was different, more emotional, more personal in the way these Port Charles cases always become personal, whether anyone wants that or not. A child. A father in panic. A secret drug injection. A narrowing window to reverse the damage. Just awful. Really awful. Jason, meanwhile, is thrown into one of the cruelest positions a parent can be put in. He thinks he's responding to his son's sudden collapse. He's operating on fear instinct, pure father mode. And then the truth starts to come out piece by piece and the emotional ground under him changes. 'Cause now he's not only terrified Danny might die, he also has to confront the fact that Danny was so desperate to keep him from leaving that he was willing to manufacture a medical catastrophe. That's not just scary, that's heartbreaking. And it says a lot. Maybe too much. It says Danny has been carrying around more fear than the adults around him realized. Or maybe they did realize it and just hoped it would settle on its own. Which is sometimes what people do in families until the problem gets too loud to ignore. But kids don't always say the things straight out. They act it. They test limits. They do reckless, impossible things because they don't have better tools yet. And Danny's method here was extreme, yes, but the feeling underneath it is painfully simple. Don't go. Please don't go. Stay. So underneath all the medical chaos is this really sad little emotional truth. A kid wanted his father to stay, and instead of saying it in a way that could be handled, he turned it into a disaster. But this being Port Charles, nothing stays little for long, because once the truth is known, the fallout is going to spread in every direction. Jason can't walk away from this unchanged. How could he? Even if Danny survives physically and that remains the first priority by a mile, the emotional damage does not vanish. The second, his heart stabilizes. Jason now has to reckon with what Danny believed he had to do to keep him close. That's guilt territory. Massive guilt territory. The kind that sticks to a person. And then there's Britt. Her role in saving Danny's life could pull her even deeper into Jason's orbit at exactly the moment everything is cracked open and raw. Shared crisis has a way of doing that. People who stand next to each other in the worst minute of someone's life tend to remain connected after, even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. And let's talk about the actual mechanics of the deception for a second, because they matter. Danny did not just fake a fainting spell, he used a drug specifically meant to slow the heart. That means intent, planning, access, nerve. It wasn't random kid chaos. It was a calculated move, even if it was made through panic and fear. And that detail makes the story darker, because it means Danny crossed from emotional impulsiveness into something more deliberate, more dangerous, more adult, in the worst possible way. And that raises another ugly question: where did he get it? How did he know enough to use it? Was he completely alone in this? Did someone overlook warning signs? Was there a trail leading up to this that nobody followed? Because life in Port Charles is always exploding somewhere. Else possible. Very possible. So while doctors fight to reverse the physical damage, the people around Danny are left staring at a much bigger problem. This did not come out of nowhere. Stuff like this never really does. There are always cracks first. Quiet ones. Easy to miss ones. A mood shift here. A strange comment there. Fear hiding under anger. Desperation dressed up as stubbornness. And then one day, the whole thing bursts open on the floor in front of a packed bag. That image, honestly, is the one that sticks. Jason almost out the door. Danny on the ground. Foam at the mouth. Seizures. The total tearing apart of a moment that was already emotionally loaded. It's brutal visual storytelling, sure, but it also lands because of how ugly and human it is. Nothing polished. Nothing noble. Just panic and bad choices and love turning into something dangerous. And that may be why this storyline hits harder than the usual hospital scare. Because underneath the shock, it feels believable in an uncomfortable way. Not the exact method, maybe not the soap-level medical drama of it all, but the emotional core. A kid afraid of being left. A parent pulled in too many directions. Adults assuming they have more time to explain things than they actually do. Then boom. Too late. That part rings true. But there's no romanticizing what Danny did. None. It was not sweet. It was not clever in some harmless way. It was horrifying. He put his own life at risk. He forced Jason into trauma. He dragged medical staff into a manufactured emergency that became real. And if the antidote had not been found in time, this could have ended in irreversible tragedy. Full stop. And still, even saying all that, it's impossible not to feel for him. Because kids do not usually go to these lengths unless something inside them is breaking. That doesn't excuse it. but it does explain the ache in the middle of the story. Danny wasn't playing a prank. He was screaming in the only way he thought would work. A disastrous scream, a nearly fatal one, but still a scream. So now Port Charles is left with the aftermath. And the aftermath may be even rougher than the collapse itself. There will be blame. There always is. Some of it deserved, some of it not. People will ask where the adults were, who missed what, who should have known, who should have stayed, who pushed too hard, who didn't listen enough. And those questions won't have neat answers. They never do. Families are messy before the ambulance even arrives. Afterward, they're worse. Jason's next move matters now more than ever. Not just as a father who nearly lost his son, but as the central figure in the fear that drove Danny to do this. Whatever plans he had, whatever road was opening in front of him, all of it has now been smashed apart by one terrifying fact. Danny believed leaving meant abandonment severe enough to risk death over, and that's not something you can pack away in a suitcase and deal with later. Britt's role matters too. She has become part of the moment that may define what happens next. A doctor, yes. A responder in crisis, yes. But also a witness to the emotional wreckage underneath the medical emergency. She didn't just treat symptoms. She got pulled into a family rupture at its most explosive point. And sometimes, that changes a person's place in the story, whether anyone planned it or not. So where does this leave things bad? Raw. Unstable. Very, very far from resolved. Danny may have succeeded in keeping Jason in Port Charles, but not in the way he wanted. Not safely. Not cleanly. Not with relief. He kept him there through terror. Through a near-fatal gamble. Through a stunt that might leave scars long after the antidote, if it comes in time, clears the drug from his system. And that's the real punch in the gut here. Danny wanted closeness. What he created instead was trauma. Still, maybe that trauma drags truth into the open. Maybe Jason finally sees how deep Danny's fear runs. Maybe the adults around him stop treating his distress like background noise. Maybe this catastrophe becomes the thing that forces actual honesty, painful honesty. The kind nobody wants because it arrives covered in hospital lights and shaking hands and almost too late consequences. But man, what a way to get there. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a confession by collapse. A desperate act dressed up as sudden illness. A kid's fear made visible in the most dangerous way possible. And a reminder, pretty ugly and pretty sharp, that in Port Charles the biggest threats are not always enemies, guns, or conspiracies. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's one scared child deciding that if he can't stop his father with words, he'll stop him with a crisis. And for one awful stretch of time, that worked, until it didn't. Until the fake became real. Until the slowed heart threatened to stop for good. Until everybody in that hospital room had to race against a lie that was turning into death. So yes, Jason stayed. But the cost of that victory, if anyone can even call it that, was almost unbearable. And now everybody involved has to live with what Danny did, why he did it, and how close it all came to ending in the worst way possible. Messy story. Brutal story. Sad as hell. And very far from over.